The air was filled with electricity. Another serious storm warning was on the way, the third in the last 2 months. Summer was about to begin, but the sun never showed. The wind and rain quickly became boring. But this storm was different. Something about it caught my attention. Meteorologists predicted a large-scale event, warning of power outages, severe flooding and hurricane-force winds. I rolled my eyes at the small white letters running across the bottom of the TV screen. Over and over again the same thing. Prepare for high winds and downed trees. Be prepared for power outages. Make sure you have batteries and fresh water. Do not run generators indoors. It was starting to get annoying. If people still haven't realized that they need to prepare, that's their own problem. Last month was tough, and we didn't have enough cash. I usually keep a small supply of food for emergencies, but last month I had to live on canned tuna with crackers and even burn my candles to save on electricity. Now, when these supplies could have been useful, they were no longer available. But at least it's payday, I thought, wrapping myself in extra clothes. I put my head down and headed to the car. I usually love rain, but today it came down diagonally, like I was in a car wash. There was thunder in the distance, and I hoped the storm would pass before I got home. I don't like thunderstorms. Driving along the main street, I felt uncomfortable. The time was early, but it seemed as if it was already dark. The street lights glowed a ghostly blue through the curtain of rain, and I was the only car on the usually busy road. I was soaking wet on the way to the car, so I decided not to go into the store with an almost empty parking lot. Once inside, I quickly looked around. Considering all the hype in the news, I expected everything to be organized much better. Therefore, I was surprised to see only to open ticket offices with several queues and crowded aisles. I grabbed my cart and headed randomly to the frozen food section. I thought about getting a couple of frozen dinners like I usually do, but if the power goes out, I won't be able to cook them and keep them fresh. I continued walking towards the baked goods section at the back of the store. Cookie. I could live on it for several days without problems. I grabbed a large plastic box of chocolate chip cookies and headed to the dairy section. While I was thinking about how to keep food fresh, a young man in a long grey raincoat walked past me. He had a shaved head and tattoos covered his neck. I noticed him because his head was not covered, while everyone else was hiding under hoods and scarves, as if they were afraid of melting. I nodded politely to him and he responded in kind. I looked at the yogurt thoughtfully, again wondering if it was worth taking. Without electricity, it would go bad before I could eat it. Suddenly a strong hand covered my mouth, pushing me forward. Don't scream. Whatever you do, don't scream. There was almost panic in the man's voice. I realized it wasn't the guy in the raincoat, and whoever grabbed me was serious. The man pushed me behind a clear plastic curtain separating the store from the back room. The man loosened his grip a little. Please don't shout. Did you see that guy in the grey coat? I turned around and was surprised to see that my captor was dressed in casual clothes. He was wearing jeans and a brown canvas jacket and looked like an ordinary worker. Having calmed down a little, I nodded and replied that I had seen him. He has a gun under his coat. The man continued, nervously looking over my shoulder. I noticed him as I drove up. He was following a young Hispanic family, trying to remain undetected. He loaded a weapon before entering the store. The man was clearly excited. We need to hide. I already called the manager to evacuate the store, but my battery was dead. Do you have a phone? I nodded, and he gently pressed my shoulder, turning me around. Check if that door is open. Quick, we can hide there. I tried not to trip as I walked towards the door. Too scared to resist, I opened the door to the small cleaning closet. There was one light bulb with a chain burning inside. I pulled it, and the room was illuminated with dim light. There was barely enough room inside for the two of us, with the sink and mop bucket taking up most of the space. I entered first, followed by a man, not taking his eyes off the entrance to the store. He quietly closed the door and turned the knob to locked. A storm was approaching outside, and a powerful clap of thunder shook the building. I involuntarily shuddered. The man, noticing my anxiety, tried to calm me down. This is a pretty safe place, even during a storm. I nodded again, too scared to speak. You said you have a phone. My hands were shaking when I handed him my phone. I watched him closely as he dialed 911, although I had no reason not to trust him. After seeing the man in the coat and learning that he had a weapon, I began to feel uneasy. Have I become a hostage? The man spoke quietly. My name is Mitchell Dorrell. I am in the back room of the Galaxy Store Foods. I saw a man come in with an assault rifle. He was keeping an eye on a young family, and I think he might start shooting. He continued talking for several more minutes, and his story rang true. Suddenly there was another clap of thunder. Then there was a sharp bang, and everything went dark. The power went out. I was terrified, but felt relieved that I was not alone. The man turned me around, so that I stood with my back to the door, and he had his back to me. I want to protect you, he said. If someone, then he will start shooting through the door. I hope that the bullets will hit me first. He casually put his arm around my shoulders, and this unexpectedly had a calming effect, even if I hardly knew him. The silence that followed was deafening. Although it was quiet, there was no sound shots, no sounds from the store. Only the rain lashed the roof, which groaned under the pressure of the water and wind. Realizing how scared I was, the man hugged me a little tighter. Standing in the dark in the arms of a stranger seemed awkward, but I decided that it would be wise to distract him with conversation. Maybe if he remembers his family and kindness, he won't hurt me. This thought made me smile internally, but I was still curious. My name is Mitch, he said, as if reading my thoughts. I just came in after work to get something tasty for my kids in case the power went out. I was talking to my wife on the phone, and when I arrived, I saw a guy in a grey coat and ended the call. Charlize, I answered, stuttering. My name is Charlize. I tried to tell him about my impressions. He has a lot of tattoos on his neck. Fear still gripped me, and my words sounded awkward. Hey, Charlize. Normally I'd shake your hand and tell you I'm glad to meet you. Honestly, grabbing people and locking them in a closet isn't my style. He continued to speak in a whisper, which added to the nervousness. I think our buddy is a member of the Moi Gang Locos, a local group. Not sure about the second guy, but he was probably either a former gang member or belonged to another one. I hope the girl and boy weren't hurt. I nodded, but then I remembered that we were surrounded by darkness. Do you think something might happen? Suddenly, an ominous grey light appeared under the door, probably from nearby lightning. Thunder boomed immediately after this, and I instinctively turned around, clinging to the man. It's okay. It's just a thunderstorm. Everything will be fine, he gently reassured. Feeling stupid for being afraid, but not wanting to back down, I asked about his children. He had 2 sons, one 7, the other 9. They didn't like thunderstorms either, and he suggested that his wife probably had her hands full right now. Most likely, they turned on the music and staged a ball band, as they called it, where they took turns singing with a guitar and fooling around. I started to laugh, but he quickly silenced me. Listen, I heard footsteps and a baby crying, followed by a series of loud bangs. This happened in pitch darkness. I buried my face in his chest, and he hugged me tightly, whispering and gently stroking my back, trying to calm me down. Outside, the storm was raging with such force that it was difficult to distinguish the sounds of nature from what was happening in the store. It sounded like a freight train rushing past. After what seemed like an eternity, but only lasted a few seconds, everything suddenly went silent. The rain stopped. There was no thunder or wind. The screams died down, and the footsteps were no longer heard. The power still hadn't returned, and the light still hadn't penetrated. Time seemed to stand still, and the world stopped. The man's grip loosened, and his touch faded. I stood there, trembling, trying to catch my breath. What was happening? And suddenly the light bulb flashed with a bright light, so dazzling that I had to cover my eyes to protect them from the unexpected light. I looked around for the man, but all I saw was the usual white glow. No small room, no sink, no mop bucket. Everything was gone. And even more so, there was no man. Am I hurt? Was I dead? Suddenly the silence was pierced by the sharp sound of a biohazard siren. I flinched in surprise. This piercing sound was repeated over and over again in perfect rhythm. What is this terrible noise? I carefully opened my eyes and found that I was at home, in my bed. Sunlight poured into the room through the slightly opened blinds, and the alarm clock reminded me that it was time to get up. I blinked a few times to make sure this was really happening. Finally, with difficulty getting up, I slowly walked towards the living room. My husband was sitting on the couch watching TV. I sat down next to her, still a little disoriented. Everything I dreamed seemed so real, so vivid, that it was hard to believe that it was just a dream or a nightmare. I rubbed my eyes and tried to cuddle up to my husband for comfort. He did not immediately notice my gesture, concentrating on changing channels. "This damn storm," he said with irritation. "They take us for idiots. Don't turn on the generator in the house. Stock up on bottled water." He shook his head, expressing dissatisfaction. I glanced over my shoulder at the street. The sun was shining, but there was not a breath of wind in the trees. The leaves were glistening with morning dew, and the sky was clear and blue with fluffy white clouds. Something didn't add up. I didn't see any signs of a coming storm. I stood up and lazily walked to the back door to walk the dogs. Looking east, I felt a slight chill as I saw thick layers of black clouds approaching us. The trees were already swaying in the distance, and a distant rumble of thunder reached me. I smiled internally. Yesterday, I managed to go to the store and watch the news. This time I was prepared. I wasn't going to be the one who makes a last-minute grocery run when the storm hits. I was ready and didn't plan to leave anywhere. I was about to return to the house when I noticed a man in a brown jacket walking with two small boys pushing their bicycles. There was a park nearby with a BMX track where the kids often rode, and I assumed that one of them had probably fallen. The boy cried quietly, rubbing his leg, and the other looked worriedly at the approaching clouds. My blood froze when I heard a man's voice. "It's just a little thunderstorm. Everything will be fine. How about I run to the store for something to eat, and then we can play air band?"